Lumix have made some huge improvements to their autofocus system over the last year or so, none more so than with the most recent firmware update, which includes things like Animal Eye AF, Car and Motorbike AF, and some general autofocus improvements over the already improved phase detect autofocus system that you got on the S5 II and the S5 IIX. But just how good is it? I wanted to find out and play around with the Animal Eye AF in particular, because I still think there's a lot of people sleeping on just how good the autofocus system in these cameras is. So I went to the beach the other day with my mum's dog to have a play around with this new feature and see what I could get. Spoiler alert, I'm pretty impressed. So I wanted to test it out in a couple of different ways, obviously with photo and video modes, but also in single shot and burst mode, as well as using it with a couple of different lenses, just to see if there was any difference between these different modes and looking at how it performs overall. And this is no scientific test, by the way, this is just me going out, having fun with my family, taking some photos and getting some video clips, seeing how it is and talking about my thoughts on it. So first up, I tried it in burst mode with the dog running slightly towards me, and I had it in electronic shutter, which means I could shoot 30 frames a second, and as you can see when I play it back, it's ridiculous how many photos it takes. It looks almost like video. But these are all raw, unedited photos straight from the camera, and overall it did a pretty good job. I think it was shot with the Sigma 100 to 400mm lens, so while it is an L mount specific lens, it's not a native Lumix lens, so you might potentially expect it to be a little bit slower in how it autofocuses, but overall the camera did a great job at locking onto the subject and keeping it in focus. There might be a couple where it's a little bit soft, but that's the beauty of shooting 30 frames a second as well, because you're going to have that many more photos. If you miss one, you're not necessarily going to be worried about that, because you will have another one. And even in this set where he is again running towards me, but we've got all of the water splashing around, it is still locked onto the dog. It has not got distracted by all of the water flying around. It is genuinely did a really good job at that. And this is again shot in electronic burst mode at 1,000th of a second. So it's taken a lot of photos very quickly. I can't really fault it on this, to be honest. And if I was to edit one of these photos, you can see just how sharp it is. And if we zoom all the way into his eye, it is super sharp. So even though these were shot with the Sigma 100 to 400 and it did a really good job, I did feel that the autofocus was slightly more reliable when you used a specific Lumix native lens. So for example, these next shots were shot with the Lumix 50mm f1.8, and it's to be expected that it might perform a little bit better because it is a native Lumix lens, so it is all designed to work flawlessly together. These were shot in single autofocus mode, so I had again running towards me. This is just one photo that it's taken. This wasn't in burst mode, and look how sharp it is. It's completely locked onto his eye. This is taken at f5. If I go to this one, again shot in single autofocus mode. I had it in Animal IF mode, obviously, and it is perfectly got the dog in focus with my mum in the background. So even though there is a human in the photo, because we've got it in Animal IF mode, it is absolutely nailed focus on the dog. It works brilliantly. This is shot at f3.2, so a pretty shallow depth of field. When you are in single shot mode and Animal Eye AF autofocus mode, like when you are tracking a human, it gives you the boxer on the subject around the eye, for example, if it can pick it up close enough, and it never loses that tracking box unless the subject does get too far away from you. And I was really happy with how it performed that. I mean, just look how sharp that is. I also got this just as he was sat still, and it is nailed focus so perfectly on his eye that as you zoom in, you can see all of us stood around him looking at him in his eye. It's so cool. It's days like this where I'm just out shooting photos for fun that I realise just how much I love photography. Now, before I get into using this autofocus feature for video, all of the Lightroom presets that I've used to edit these photos are available on my website as part of my everyday collection, which you will find linked down below. And if you sign up to my newsletter, you will also get access to my black and white presets completely for free. On a little side note, I am massively excited about what is going on this channel over the next few months, and I have a ton of new videos on the way, and I cannot wait to share it all. And by being a part of my newsletter, you will be one of the first to know. And there will also be sometimes extra videos that go out to newsletter subscribers that don't go out on this YouTube channel publicly. So if that is something you are interested in, hit the link down below to sign up. Thank you if you do, it is massively appreciated. Make sure you don't miss out by signing up, and yeah, back to this video. Now when you move into video, it is a pretty similar story really. It is a little bit slower when I was using the Sigma 100 to 400. And depending on how fast he was moving, it did sometimes lose focus and struggle to get him back. And that was the same whether I was shooting in 25 frames a second or 50 frames a second. I think a lot of the fact that the 100 to 400 is a little bit slower is down purely to the amount of compression that you get. So that depth of field is a lot shallower when you are using a telephoto lens like that. When I used the Lumix 50mm 1.8, it was a lot more reliable. Again, there were times where it slightly lost focus, but it was much quicker at regaining it and keeping tracked and locked onto him. Again, I do think that is to be expected because the 50mm, as I've already mentioned, is a native lens, and I do genuinely think that compression on a telephoto lens has a lot to do with it because the depth of field is that much shallower. On the whole though, it does a really good job and I'm very impressed with it, and a lot of it is down to this latest firmware update that Lumix have brought out for the S5 II and the S5 IIX with features that we've seen previously in the G9 II, but there are also some general autofocus improvements, and I have noticed a difference, to be honest. It is a lot more reliable than it already was with the new phase detect autofocus system, and it just goes to show how committed Lumix are to improving these little things that make a bigger difference to improve the overall reliability and experience of using their gear. There are some arguments out there to say that it is not as good as Sony's AI autofocus or Canon's autofocus system, and that might be the case, but it is very, very quickly catching up. And it's exciting to see where it will be in another year or two, because honestly, the autofocus system in these cameras is more than reliable enough. It is great, and I very rarely have problems with it, and if I do, it is usually down to user error, my fault. So that's it for this video. If you want to know more about some other features included in the latest firmware update for the S5 II, I recommend you watch this video next, and I'll see you